This is a picture of myself in Jamestown, New York in 1950 with my third telescope, an 8-inch f4.5 RFT. This is the 8-inch setup to photograph the lunar eclipse in Detroit. This is in about 1960. This was a temporary fork mounting setup. It was extremely cold. It was actually below zero that evening. This is about 1:15 in the morning, very close to first contact. Here we see the progression of the shadow, the outer shadow. As the shadow progresses, you can start to see the reddish part of on the dark side. We start getting closer to totality, and this is in totality. Shortly after these Detroit shots, I moved to Santa Barbara and proceeded to develop the sphere-mounted system. And in principle, I'm using a floating ball and socket that when it sits in its basin, the weight of the entire telescope is the equivalent of an equal mass of water that would be displaced. So based on this principle, I start to build a prototype. This slide it shows that the relative motion of the sphere inside the basin, any vibration of the sphere causing it to go up and down, will be damped by the mass of the water that's trapped in that thin film trying to accelerate very rapidly up and down. This theoretically was supposed to give excellent damping properties. An armature was constructed and set up on a turntable onto which this template was set up, and the turntable rotated until a plaster buildup basically made a master model in a plaster. From this, I would make plaster cast tools to use for the fiberglass layup. This is the two-piece plaster mold that was pulled off from that master model, and then fiberglass would be laid up inside of that. The two shells, once laid up inside, the two shells would be put together, and then a lap seam along the inside would make a complete fiberglass sphere, with the opening, of course. This is the prototype sphere set in its basin and on a tripod mounting prior to putting in the optical assembly. This is the optical assembly completed, and it's a Cassegranian, 10-inch Cassegranian is in place. All this was done secret at the time in Santa Barbara. This is the completed 10-inch, and of course beside it is the 4-inch RFT that was the very original prototype that proved out the principle. This is the complete assembly. The Cassegranian, it'd be like a Coday focus out at right angles on the sphere. The viewfinder is immediately above the main eyepiece. Another view of the same. This was the very first public showing of the sphere mount system. This is on Mount Pinos. It's on, I believe it was July 5th, 1967. The 10-inch was subsequently taken to Stellafane, and it did get a first prize for mechanical ingenuity. And this photograph was sent to me by Dr. Henry Paul, a renowned astrophotographer. On the way up there, I stopped at a fiberglass house that made my original small 14-inch sphere with a 4-inch telescope. And this is a 17-inch sphere that I picked up, and this shown here modified to receive the original 8-inch Richesfield that I had made back in Jamestown many years prior. This is the 8-inch f4.5 remounted in that 17-inch sphere. This is another view of the same. This was taken up at Mount Pinos, north of Los Angeles. I did return to Stellafane, I believe it was in 68, and you can see the small Richesfield was shown there. It wasn't entered, it was just shown. Another view in Stellafane. Dick Buckroeder was at the same Stellafane convention, where he showed his catadioptic Newtonian system. This is myself with George East on the right. I saw him a couple other times. In 1968, I'd moved to Panorama City and started doing more work with the scopes, and I started developing, getting the clock drive system to work. This is using the 10-inch system. Basic mechanism was the use of a suction cup mounted at the end of a polar axis shaft. So the idea would be to lock the suction cup, the sphere onto the suction cup, and then drive the gear train to have it rotate about the polar axis or to a near proximity. This is the suction cup locked in place. This is another view of the basin with the water in place with the sphere not located. This was the night that I first succeeded in clock driving following Arcturus. This is the telescope brought indoors after the successful first tracking. I had Arcturus on for probably about a half hour or so. I was in the field of view. I also experimented with another drive system where I'd use a belt and pulley system. The belts would lock onto the sphere, and then the roller assembly would capture the belt, hold it tight, and rotate it. The sphere would be dropped in place. There'd be a very shallow groove in the sphere to receive the pulley assembly or the belt assembly. Then the belts would be attached at either end of the trough. This is a view with the sphere installed. The belt is laying in the groove, and it's secured or latched at either end. I had the system set up and working at the Griffith Park one afternoon when there was a solar eclipse somewhere to the south. Of course, it was only partial at this location. This view was in the driving mode phase. It was in a partial mode. I had it set up on a small ground glass so that I had an actual image, so that nobody would end up trying to look into it. The system was set up, and it was tracking. This is another view of the telescope set up at Mount Pinos. I also started construction on an 8-inch f7 telescope, and I was going to use the same 24-inch diameter sphere. And this shows a fiberglass layup in the hemisphere portion. This is the layup in the truncated portion of the sphere. The fiberglass is trimmed net to the edge of the plaster mold. Then these would be assembled, and then working inside the small opening, I'd lay in a lap seam along the inside to make one complete sphere out. This shows the plaster partially removed and the sphere is exposed. I didn't use a gel coat on this at this time, and it did require some additional work. I had anticipated I was going to paint it anyway. This is the sphere completely removed from the mold. The flashing, of course, would be all cleaned off, and then the whole thing would be resurfaced, then subsequently painted. This is the 24-inch sphere, and Caesar the cat is there for scale purposes. This is the sphere completed and painted, and you can see a provision already for attaching the upper structure in the bolt circle. This is the mirror cell assembly that the 8-inch mirror would sit inside of here. Also on the back side, I believe, is the counterweight for additional mass that I needed to balance it. And this would be set on a scale to try to hit net targets. This is a view looking inside of the sphere at the back side, the bottom, and you can see three threaded, not studs, but three fasteners are installed and bonded in place. And into these three spots, a threaded rod or studs would be screwed in place, and then the mirror cell that we just saw would drop on top of that. This is a view of a turntable assembly used to make a plaster pattern that fiberglass would be laid up on top of this, and this would be part of the flange interface. It had some other purpose I'll describe shortly. This is the upper tube truss assembly. The welded aluminum frame connects the bottom flange, which was formed on the plaster that we saw previously. The upper fiberglass section was actually laid up inside of a pail that was heavily waxed so it would come off cleanly, but it made a good ready tool. The lower ring, you notice, is black, and the intent of that was that shape was curved such that any reflections off of that would have been captured by the small tube or the bucket assembly above, so that would always present a black image just to minimize any more reflections than were necessary. This is the completed 8-inch f7 telescope in the 24-inch sphere. I believe this is up at Idlewild, and is one of the early first shakedowns of the system. This is again at Idlewild. The upper left is the original 8-inch f4.5 in the 17-inch sphere. In the near foreground is the 8-inch f7 in the 24-inch sphere, and in the back to the right is the 10-inch Cassegranian in the 24-inch sphere. Here is my 68 GTO convertible, which was used for transporting my 8-inch f7 very handily. It would sit in the back seat and just fit in perfectly. This is another view showing the adaptability of the convertible. Here again is the 10-inch Cassegranian and the 8-inch f7. This view is at Mount Pinos. This is a shot up in Mount Pinos again. This was taken by Orrin Ernst and given to me. It's good for showing scale. This is a shot in Mount Pinos. This is one of the things I was experimenting with, putting a wet towel on it in the cool breeze to get a rapid cool down, to get it prepared for the evening observing. This telescope was subsequently repainted this is in a pearlescent paint, and this is pretty much the final configuration before I sold it. This is another view. You can see the anti-glare panel, which the base of the truss expands so that I don't get any reflections off the truss work, and it seemed to work out pretty good. It had pretty good definition. This is another view. This is a dead head-on view. The little red button in the center was actually a Hartwell latch that the diagonal was attached at the end of the stud, and I was able to pop one diagonal out and put in a smaller minimum size diagonal for planetary observing.